Hey everyone, welcome to Podcast Insider Special Edition. And I have with me today Heather Osgood from True Native Media. Heather, how are you?
I'm doing great. Todd, how are you?
I'm good, I've been kind of excited here because I've been doing like one or two of these a week, talking with friends, and it's been a while since you and I chit-chatted. Probably more than a year since we've had maybe actual face-to-face, but for those that don't know you, can you give me a little 411 or give the audience a little 411 of who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I founded True Native Media, which is a podcast representation agency, 9 years ago. So in January we had our 9-year anniversary, which is kind of crazy. And I started the company because I got really into podcast listening, as many of us do, and I had an advertising background, and I just kind of took a look around the podcast space, and I was like, why are there not more ads on all of these shows? I know I can sell ads on them. Why don't I start this company? And so I started the company really to service the independent creator who, at that time, you had to have 50,000 downloads per episode to get representation, to have someone sell advertising on your show. And I was like, I know I can sell podcasts that are smaller than that. And here we are 9 years later, and I was correct. We can sell ads on shows that are smaller, but of course through the years, as you have a tendency of doing, we are now working with shows that are a little bit on the larger side. But yeah, it's been a really fun journey.
Do you think the question that you basically, when you were getting ready to form True Native Media and you said, I can sell advertising and how come these shows aren't being served, isn't that a little bit almost the same even now, 9 years later? There's so much opportunity still available in the space.
Absolutely, there is. I would say one of the biggest differences for me has been the move to dynamic ad insertion. And so when I started, everything was embedded. So all of the ad reads were embedded on a per episode basis. And so you had to have a pretty decent size audience in order for advertisers to be interested. And so what we have done with dynamic ad insertion is now we're able to insert ads across a show's full catalog. Now, of course, their unique listener count doesn't change
Mm-hmm.
regardless of how many, whether you're doing it on an embedded basis or dynamically inserted basis. The difference, though, is that we can serve a much larger number of impressions. So an advertiser can come to us and we can say, hey, this show, maybe they have an audience, a unique audience size of, let's say, 10 to 15,000 unique listeners, but we could serve you, 50,000 impressions over the course of a 30-day period. And that really has helped us. And so while yes, there are still smaller shows that are going unsold, and and to be honest, I think that there's always going to be
Yeah.
that long tail that goes unserviced. With dynamic ad insertion, we certainly are able to help a much larger group of podcasters, and I think really with programmatic ad insertion, as that continues to grow, I think that there'll be more and more opportunities for smaller and smaller shows.
I want to back up just a little bit. You've had a significant professional journey. True Native Media wasn't your first go. When you operated your prior businesses and did other things and had other enterprises going on, what did you move forward? What did you take from that and bring into True Native Media, or was it not even interconnected, or was there
Yeah.
some relationship there?
Yeah, so I started my career in radio ad sales, and I learned so much in radio ad sales. If I could do my career again, I think I would still start with radio ad sales, because I would literally walk into businesses and they would say, "You are the 10th radio rep who's been in my door today. Like, get out of here." And so I had to develop a really thick skin and a lot of resilience. So I moved from radio ad sales to newspaper sales, And newspaper was a breeze to sell in comparison to radio, which sounds now kind of so counterintuitive because, newspaper feels, I think, more dead, I would say, than radio does. But from there, I started a trade show production company. And what we did in that company is we put on 7 different trade shows a year, and it was advertising sales too. So I would rent the facility and I would go out to businesses and say, hey, we're putting on this event. You should come and exhibit here. So it was just a different form of advertising. And in that almost 10-year period when I owned that company, I learned so much about being a business owner. And so I was really, I think, able to take a lot of my experience from radio ad sales to newspaper sales to being a business owner, all of that really were, learning lessons that helped me create True Native Media into what it is today. So yeah, I feel like I learned a lot.
It's funny is, you talk about going into radio stations and you're the 10th rep the day. I think my experience when we were, I'm not doing media buyer visits anymore or anything like that, but I remember one of the first I went to MediaCon and met with their great group and we had no budget. I'm in with literally a JCPenney suit, and it was, the thing that I had brought was chocolate macadamia nuts. But one of the gals said, well, the last podcast person that was here brought us iPods. And of course, that was when people could still gift things, quote unquote. That has changed, obviously. But the thing that kind of struck me that I was out of my league was as I was walking out, the gal that was the lead of that group, she grabbed the bottom of my jacket, pulled on it. She said, never come into my building again with a rack suit. I was like, oh, wow. So, but then that was in New York, and I could go to LA and show up in a polo and Dockers, and they were cool with it. So,
I will say I started my career in California.
So a little more laid back, as opposite to come in your Brooks Brothers suit or whatever it is.
Oh, man.
So things have come a long ways, and, there's some things that are still true today, maybe that was even 10, 15 years ago. But what do you see right now? And this is the thing everyone's having this dilemma on, is the ground truth in terms of, as we record this today, we're seeing both audio and video. Video's got the big, it's a big shiny object right now. But what are you seeing as ground truth in terms in podcasting right now, as when you're talking to buyers and that kind of stuff? What's the feel you're getting back as you're having those conversations?
We are talking about video so much in the podcast space right now, and I am so interested to see how all of it unfolds. From an advertiser perspective, we definitely are getting more inquiries for those purchases that are simulcasted. And what I would say, the definition essentially of simulcast means is that you've got an audio-only show that is available on audio-only platforms, but then you have a video portion of the show too. And usually we're looking for them to be essentially carbon copies, right? So if I go on YouTube and I watch your podcast, or if I, go on Apple and listen to them, I'm going to have the same experience. Obviously, one is just going to be audio, the other is going to be video. So there certainly is a demand for that.
So
what I don't want us, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
What I don't want us to lose sight of, though, is that audio is still superior to video in the podcast space, and from an advertising perspective, right? So, maybe 1 out of 10 inquiries will come in with a request for that simulcast, or, 1 out of 20 might come in where they're like, hey, we just want shows that are our YouTube. So, they're coming in, but audio is still really taking the bulk of, the sellable impressions. There still is the most most interest there. And I feel like there is just this huge push to video, and we can't lose sight of the fact that we are an audio platform. The other thing that I think is so important for us to look at is that audio and video are consumed very differently. So, for instance, we have a podcast that we work with that is primarily a YouTube show, and most of all of her views are coming through YouTube. We started really looking at their numbers the other day, and we're talking about how can we create better retention for your advertisers. And when we're thinking that most of the advertisers in our space right now are direct response advertisers, they are looking for a direct return on that ad spend. When you look at a podcast, most people listen to about 80% of an episode. And I believe the average length is somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes, right? So we could surmise that the average podcast listener is listening to about 20 minutes of a podcast. Well, what is the time spent listening on YouTube? It is much, much less. And so what we found with this show is that most of the views are happening in the first 10 minutes of this 30-minute podcast. And so that means if the ad is falling at minute 15, the bulk of their audience isn't even there. They're not even listening, right? So we're talking about how can we get these ads to fall in the first 10 minutes of the show so that they actually get heard. So it's a very different beast. And I think that it's important for us to realize that as we are so quick to adopt this idea of video.
It's a little bit of music to my ears here because I've been answering this question a lot and talking to content creators a lot about this exact thing. And we'll talk about this focus on monetization a little bit later that a lot of new content creators have. But, we introduced a product recently, it's, I don't know, 6 months or so, VidToPod, where we actually allowed those that are video first the ability to very easily sign up and automatically create their podcast episode and get it distributed. They don't really have to do nothing, but if they post over to YouTube, it just kind of happens. And what we're starting to hear, and we've had great success, that product has hit all KPIs that we set for it. And the feedback we're starting to get from those customers is, wow, we're reaching a whole brand new audience. There is no overlap. We have people that watch us and people that listen to us. And our listening audience, I would say to about 90% from what they're telling us, are saying these are new listeners. And he says we've had to kind of jigger our show a little bit because we've had to make sure we're describing stuff so that the audio audience knows what we're talking about versus, just throwing a visual up on the screen. And he says he thinks it's actually made him better video creators too. He says, because we know people are watching or listening to the show in the background. So I thought, there's a little bit of an insight in that regard. And from someone that's a video first creator that now has an audio podcast that they never had before. And so it is kind of interesting. But at the same time, the audio people that I'm talking to, they're a little bit slower going to the video side. I think as the shows get bigger, they do consider it because maybe they have more budget or whatever, or more time and more team members. But, there's always going to be this battle on measurement. You've got the YouTube measurement and you've got the podcast measurement. And we, and for many years we were asked, okay, you got to have attribution. Let's get more data, brand safety, all these things that we've been asked to add to the audio side that we have. What are you hearing now? Are people talking about when you talk to companies, or is that conversation just happened once with the new clients, or what are you seeing in that regard as far as attribution, brand safety, measurement? Are you having people that are objecting or have questions or doubts, or where's that conversation these days?
No, I mean, I think that it's super important for us to focus on attribution. Attribution is a key component to the success in podcast advertising. And, I think another good analogy is we have been working with a show that is on a platform that does not allow for pixel tracking.
Oh,
The platform also requires that you embed the ads. They don't have the ability to do dynamic ad insertion. So we have a lot of advertisers who are like, hey, we really want embedded ads, but we also really want pixel tracking. And this show gets passed over frequently because they cannot pixel track. And so I was working with my team the other day, my sales team, and I was like, hey guys, I think that this is a really important observation that, having this pixel tracking is more important than anything else. And part of the reason that pixel tracking in particular is so valuable is that advertisers at the end of the day don't really care where the results are coming from. They just care that the results are there. And the pixel can prove that. And
a portion of it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is really helpful. And that, in my opinion, has really helped the podcast ad sales industry really tremendously, being able to have that. Brand safety is another important feature. And, when we think about brand safety, there is so much that comes with it because we are having these ads inserted into very personalized shows. And there isn't a human being out there who has the ability to listen through every podcast episode and say, oh, well, last year they said X, Y, and Z, and I don't think I want to align with that. And so the brand safety tools really help with the capability to do that and to make sure that the brands are aligning with the content they want to align with. But the other feature I think that is provided is that we have higher capabilities of targeting now. Now, granted, you have to do all of this through programmatic. This is not done on a show-by-show basis, but you can do a lot of contextual targeting. So most of the brand safety tools are also have that capability of doing the brand, content alignment that is really very powerful for an advertiser.
We've been offering programmatic through a partner for, it's been over a year. Mm-hmm. And we've had great success with that. The number of shows up on it that are receiving a check every month is significant. These are shows that, we have some shows that are fully, big shows that could do just standalone host endorsed, DAI, they could do all that. But what we found is that longer the shows have been on programmatic, the more they're actually starting to make it a CPM status. So although, sometimes some markets, the CPM isn't that great on a delivery, but in retrospect, the podcasters are telling us, listen, I don't have to deal with no one. I've just flipped the switch. I picked the categories I want to be run. I'm getting about an 80% fill on my inventory. Yeah, maybe I'm not getting a $20 CPM or 25 or 30 or 40, whatever that may have been for that ad. But I know what's going to come through the front door every week or every month when the check comes. I have a, approximate number. Mm-hmm. And so how do you see... And the thing is, again, the programmatic runs, let's be frank, probably from about 6 to 15. Haven't seen anything come in higher than 15 on a programmatic ad yet. So how do you see the increase in programmatic advertising that's filling inventory now that may have once been a host read? Is it having an impact, or is it a good mix?
So my belief is that we need both. And the reason is that when you're selling dynamically inserted, and you're doing that on a direct show-by-show basis, we don't have the capability to predict what's going to happen in the future. Right. So let's say I'm creating a campaign for 2 months in advance, and an advertiser says, hey, we want to run 100,000 impressions on this show. And I can look back at historics and I can say, yeah, we shouldn't have any problem delivering 100,000 impressions. Let's do that.
Until...
Well, yeah, it can go one of two ways, right? But maybe that month they have a great guest, and all of a sudden, instead of having 100,000
Mm-hmm.
impressions, they have 125,000 impressions. And we can't predict that. We
Right,
can't
right.
predict when a show is going to grow. And so we can only sell based on historics.
Yep.
So you're never going to sell 100% of the available impressions when you're doing direct sales. But with programmatic, it's a computer, right? The
Yep.
computer's like, hey, I'm looking for a spot to fill. There's one, I'm going to fill it.
Yep.
And so if you have the combination of both, I really believe that that's where you're going to see the most profit because number one, as you mentioned, you're going to get a higher CPM for these direct reads, but also programmatic can fill in the cracks. And that being said, I mean, there is definitely the ability for shows that maybe haven't hit the threshold
Mm-hmm.
to have direct sales done on their show that they can tap into programmatic. And maybe that means they're going to get $200 or $300 a month. That,
Yep.
hey, that's going to cover the expenses
That's right.
of running their show. And suddenly it doesn't feel like such a strain.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe they're going to be more creative. Maybe they're going to be able to invest $200 into show growth. And so now instead of it being a $200 check, their audience is doubled in size and it's a $400 check. So, I mean, I think that they all work together well. I do believe that programmatic is going to continue to grow because of the ease of placement. It's easy for the podcaster,
Yep.
it's easy for the buyer. As we talked about with like these brand safety tools or the targeting tools, contextual targeting, geo targeting, all those things,
Mm-hmm.
you can do so much with programmatic. Of course, I specialize in selling host read
Yep.
direct buys, and I still believe that there is so much power in that. And when you have a larger audience, your audience is going to be more receptive to a host read ad. They already know, like, and trust you, and it's going to be a better experience for that listener. So I think that there is definitely a place for both, but I certainly see that programmatic is going to be increasing in the years to come.
And the thing is advantage now that wasn't in the past was, I'd look at a 3-month average and say, yeah, that show's going to deliver, let's just use a number, 65,000 downloads that month. And they come in at 62. Well, that's not as big of a deal. But when they come in at 85, and I know I'm only going to get paid for 65, and we had really in those old days no way to pull that media out so that we hit the limit on it. So at least now you can do pretty good forecasting, and you get it to 97-98% rate, you're probably pretty happy, and that way the client's happy because first of all, they're not going to give you more money based upon
Right.
what you've contracted for the RP, and you don't have to eat 10% or whatever you went over. So I think that's where from your side, it's these DEI tools allow you to drop that ad out when you hit the number and then fill it with
Right.
programmatic. That's a beautiful thing, especially when a show has a big month. But at the same point, sometimes a show comes up short. That's easier to explain to the media buyer than we went way over. But yeah, so I think shows are, I understand that where that game is at still today. And I think podcasters that are listening to this have to understand that you do the best to get as much money from them as possible, but there's lots of unpredictability, and you get mentioned in a magazine or newspaper, and well, really not those medias anymore, but you get something online and all of a sudden you get a
Right.
boost or you get a guest or whatever it may be. And you'll be like, wow, I didn't make money on 35,000 downloads at the host read level, but maybe I got it at the programmatic level. So,
Yeah.
and then you don't guaranteed going to get 100% fill. So this is
Right.
kind of the game that goes on. Do you, we've talked a little bit about this difference in advertiser interest. Is the ad strategy, is it completely different for video, or is the ad strategy how do those ad strategies work between audio and video? We know that a lot of podcasters do great host read ads or, with whatever the call to action is, but where does it lay in video? Are they looking for more creative stuff, or where you see that play out?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question because if you are strictly a YouTube channel
Hmm.
and you're partnering with advertising, the expectation is very different than if you're a podcast on YouTube. So if you're a YouTube channel, most of the time you can only sell one ad per video. And it should definitely be a fully integrated video and often a video of that content creator with the product and pushing the product and
Hmm.
things like that. When we're talking about, video that's a podcast, though, we are using very, very similar rules. And I will mention that the YouTube CPMs are going to be much higher, right? Like
Mm.
in average, YouTube right now is somewhere between $40 and $50
Wow.
CPM. Yeah, but they're only doing one ad read. So with podcast videos, we can do the ad reads very, very similar to what we're doing, if not identical to what we're doing in the audio format. Of course, you're going to have to create some sort of a video portion. If you're creating a video, you can't just go to a black screen while you're
Right, right,
talking about
right,
an
right.
advertiser. But I mean, you can do easier integrations, whether it's just a little bit of B-roll or just some logos on the
Hmm.
screen, the promo code, things like that. So there is the ability to put multiple ads within your YouTube podcast, and there is the expectation that you're going to have, multiple reads. That it's not going to be the same as if you were buying a YouTube ad, but also the CPMs are cheaper too, right? Like, so for most of ours, we're selling them simulcast and it's just one lump sum, right? It's
Right.
like one number.
One
So
number.
this is how many overall impressions you're going to get. This is your CPM. The hardest part is, of course, in YouTube, you can't do dynamic ad
Right,
insertion. The
right.
ad has to be embedded in that
Hmm.
video. And so trying to come up with that equation is a little bit tricky, but we're navigating it. So it's just a matter of looking at both platforms.
That I'm thinking about that a little bit because if you have a evergreen audio podcast, changing that ad out is, we hit a number, we change the like put a different ad in or take it out, or that's real easy to mix and match and not
Hmm.
and maximize. And that's probably the advantage on audios. You can maximize revenue. Whereas again, if you're talking about the video and you're doing two or three host reads in there, they're stuck. That's like old
Hmm.
days. They're stuck.
Yep.
They are really stuck. So how okay, so this is maybe a bigger tricky question. So I know the numbers on evergreen shows in podcasting. I have that seared in my mind. I know what percentage of shows have evergreen and have reoccurring traffic months down the road. And it's not as big a number as most people think. And but YouTube is a bit of a different animal. Do you see that those shows are continuously accumulating, or do they peak out and then you're kind of all right, well, we didn't lose a bunch of money here, but the advertiser definitely got a bump. What's your mindset on that? Or
Hmm.
I guess it depends on the show, right? If they
It
get
does
lots.
depend on the show, but there is a lot more volatility in YouTube than there are on podcasts. Like typically in podcasting, you've got a pretty consistent number.
Mm-hmm.
Now that could come from the fact that when people subscribe, that episode gets downloaded, but it doesn't get listened to, right?
Yep, yep,
So if you're on YouTube and you subscribe to a channel, you don't automatically watch every single video
yep.
that person puts out. And that is what happens in podcasting. But I just see so much more volatility. It's like number one, your subscriber count has absolutely nothing to do with how many views that you have per
Yeah.
video.
Yep.
And sometimes I'll look at a channel and it's like, man, this one got 10,000 views and that one got 100,000 views. And it doesn't feel often like there is as much rhyme or reason. And all of it has to do with just how one video gets discovered. And if this one video gets discovered, then it gets, viewed a bazillion times,
Yep.
but this one maybe didn't, and so now it's got a much lower number. So trying to come up with like average video views, I think, is a little bit trickier. We're actually subscribing now to a platform that looks and actually analyzes all the videos
Mm-hmm.
instead of us just manually going through and being like, okay, like for the last 3 months, let's look and average. Like we're subscribing to a service that's giving us those average view
Oh,
numbers,
that's cool.
which I feel much more comfortable with because then we know that there is real validity to that. But
Yeah.
you're going to have some ups and downs when it comes to YouTube.
Yeah, because it could really affect the overall performance of the campaign if a video
Absolutely.
underperforms. And then you're like, okay, what then is there compensations going into the videos? You got to comp me another ad? Is that discussion happening?
Well, yeah, I mean that hasn't happened yet.
Good.
I'm not saying it. At least it hasn't happened for us. I'm sure that
Yeah.
it will. So typically, how it works with embedded ads, and it would be the same thing with the YouTube. If an ad performs at about 75% or greater, then they're happy with it.
Okay.
Because within that 30-day period, you're expecting that that show is going to reach a certain number of views or listens. And, if it's at 75% of that, then you're like, okay, we're good because it's still going to continue for the
Hmm.
next, 45, 50 days to get, some exposure. If you're 30 days out and we're at 25% of what our expected impressions were, then we're talking. And then the advertiser's like, hey, we're going to need to make good for this. And that certainly is a conversation that we have on the audio front and when we're selling embedded. And it's the same difference with video. You can't totally underperform for your advertiser. They're going to need to have some compensation for that.
I had a pretty serious conversation probably 2 months ago. Maybe it's been three with Spotify.
Mm.
And basically they're looking to have the podcast host through API push a video to their platform. And I'm like, why would I do that? Because my podcasters are updating their ad reads in their audio files. They're making money on the inventory that's going
Mhm.
into Spotify. And the second we put a video over the top in the way they're operating right now, that audio inventory is worth zero. It is no longer
Yep.
worth anything. And they can't change the copy out. It's the same thing like YouTube. So they're stuck with a single ad. I said, my recommendation to content creators right now and podcasters is have two channels on Spotify. Well, we don't want you to do that. I'm like, well, I said, you're forcing the podcaster's hand to have two channels or not do video at all.
Mhm.
And because you're taking money out of that creator's pocket, you're not going to make up the difference. You're not going to pay them that. You're only going to pay them what's runs in the ads that maybe you put around it if that podcaster qualifies. So they are not happy with me because I've said no. We've got the podcaster's best interest. And if you're going to, and even if it's a little, let's say someone's on programmatic and they deliver 3,000 downloads or listens over on Spotify, they still are going to get whatever that revenue is. Whereas they put a
Mhm.
video on it, it's zero.
Yep.
So I don't, have you had this, maybe you don't want to say, but,
Oh,
but the discussion I had was, Heather, I wasn't nice.
there is so much confusion about Spotify video right now. And I have had many, many conversations with our creators about this because they're getting so much pressure to move to
Yeah.
video.
Yep.
But the reality is exactly what you said is the minute that you move to video, you are no longer uploading an MP3, you're
That's,
uploading an MP4 and ads cannot be inserted
that's right.
into that MP4. So you're losing out on revenue. In my opinion, if you believe that video is the best choice for you as a content creator, you should start with YouTube.
Yeah.
If you want to grow a video audience, grow it on YouTube. Once you've proven it out in a platform that is known for video and known for succeeding in video, then move to Spotify for video.
Yeah.
But let's stick with our audio path if you're succeeding in audio.
Yeah, good advice. So that leads to my next question then. It's one of two conversations with a content creator. I'm not growing, or I need to make money. And usually that make money conversation comes quick, 90 days. And, and for those of you watching or listening, this is the ugly baby conversation I'm going to have with you. If you're new and you're knocking it out of the ballpark, great. We're going to be able to get some dollars into your pocket. If you're new and still finding your voice, let's find our voice and get building audience before we get totally focused on revenue. So what are you seeing? And of course, the folks you get are already well established, but what are some of the common mistakes you see podcasters making when they're trying to monetize and people that you're talking to?
I think the most common mistake that people make is that they think that advertising is the best way to monetize their show.
Yeah.
It depends a lot on the content of your show, right? But the ways that you can create revenue that are not ad-based is that you can sell a product that you personally are creating, right?
That's right.
So even if it's 200 people that are listening to your show, those are 200 people that could be very interested in a product that you sell.
Exactly.
Next, I am blown away by the amount of money that people receive from listener support. I have had conversations just in the last couple of months where I'm like, wait, you have 7,000 people giving you $5 a month? And I'm like, that is so much money. That's way more than we're going to make you in advertising.
I mean, like, don't put no advertising in there at all.
No. Just keep the listener support coming. Right?
No.
So, and I think what's important about listener support is that is something that's going to grow, right? So like, if you start with listener support and this month you get $20, like, great. But if you keep at it, I can promise you there is so much opportunity with listener support. So highly recommend listener support.
And I tell podcasters the same thing. I said, you're 100 people listening to your show, you're going to make a quarter with us. But 100 people, you might get 5 or 10 to give you $10.
Right.
Yeah. So
yes.
Yeah.
It's a much better path.
Right.
The other thing that I would highly encourage people to do is to create affiliate partnerships. And what that means, if you're not familiar with that, is that number one, there are websites out there that you can go and sign up on. If you just type in, podcast affiliate opportunities, you will come up with sites that can help you arrange these. But you are essentially advertising a product on your show. They are not paying you to advertise, like to run that advertisement, but you get a portion of any sales that result from the ad that ran. And it's a great way for you to get practice as a podcaster and learn what it's like to create good ad reads. And then the great part about it is there's 100% transparency. With the advertisers I work with, they don't tell us whether or not the campaigns are working. They don't say, oh yeah, we sold $100,000 worth of merchandise from that campaign. They just say, yeah, it worked okay. I guess we'll renew, But when you have affiliate opportunities, you know how many conversions happened. And then you can tweak the ad. If you're like, man, I did that and it didn't work at all. One of two things: either your audience isn't nearly as engaged as you think they are, or number two, you're really not that great at doing ad reads and you need to work on it. So you have the opportunity through affiliate ad reads to create some really great campaigns. And they usually pay relatively high, right? So like it might be $25 a sale. And that in and of itself, you could create a lot of revenue. You can get practice. And that's before you get to a place where you're like, hey, now I'm looking for representation. Now I want somebody to sell ads for me. Now I want programmatic, right? So those are channels I think that podcasters should look at. Yeah,
the listener support is huge. And, we made a relationship with a company called Code ADX. And it's actually, Blueberry makes no money on this relationship. But the reason we did it was we wanted the ability for podcasters to have the ability to do just that, have affiliate type offers. Now, it's purely Shopify sites. They've integrated with Shopify. And so you go in and you sign up and you go look through the offers and you pick, oh yeah, that'll be great for my audience. Or no, that's not. I'm not going to pick that. So you get to pick a Shopify store to promote, and it's unique deals that can't be found anywhere else on the web. So there's no discount code that no one will find through any other sites out there to beat the deal that you offer. So that's a really great way to go. But going back to what you said, I remember back in 2005 when I had done 1 month of advertising with GoDaddy, and they called me back and they said, hey, we want to renew for a whole year. And the biggest mistake they made, Heather, they told me how many sales I had. And it was like 376. And I was like, wow. And I had only charged them $300 for that month. And she says, well, we want to renew the deal. I said, I need some time to think. And I spent 24 hours having no idea what I was doing, trying to figure out what the value of 370 customers was to GoDaddy for a long period of time. And I came up with a number that was just kind of like me having done it on a scratch pad. And I went back and gal's name was Chris. And I said, Chris, we'll sign for a year. This is how much I want a month. And she said yes so fast that it was like I had said the magic word to a used car salesman. And I paused and she laughed because she says, well, you went too low, didn't you? I said, yeah, but I gave you a number. I said, but how about this? How about a bonus? And I made this up on the fly. I said, how about a bonus if we get over this number of new customers every month? And she thought, and she said, yeah, we can do that. That 3-minute conversation was a $3 million deal. So, but we didn't know. They had no idea. So again, I think you're running into a situation where you go out and do these campaigns and you ask the advertiser how we did, and like, oh, well, we're going to renew. But they don't tell you the performance. They don't tell you. And if they decrease the budget, say, well, we didn't do as good as we thought we did. Or if they increase the budget, we did better than. That's the only way you can tell as the media buyer, because they're very secretive. It's bad.
They are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
Especially if you're an agency and you're representing an advertiser, that information is confidential.
Yeah.
But yeah, most advertisers are not going to tell you how you actually performed.
And we all want that information, but it's not there. I think the thing that I'm also having a multiple conversations with, it happened yesterday on one of the shows I do, is, it was basically a discussion how we get to $5 billion. And that's entertaining in its own right. But brands and agencies, I feel, sometimes struggle to understand the real value of podcast ads. And as much as I feel we bent over backwards to give them attribution, brand safety, everything that they really asked for, how come we're not still seeing a major influx of not DR, not that response? How come we're not seeing more money that's being spent still on radio and still on television? How come we're not seeing more money being dumped into the podcasting space? What's holding us back?
So I think that it's two things. Number one, marketers their reputation is based on their performance. And so when you look at these huge companies and these huge marketers, what are they going to do? Are they going to make a safe bet or are they going to make a risky bet? And, if you think about a budget of a company, let's just say like a huge Fortune 500 company has a $100 million advertising budget a year. They have the historics for that budget. They know what they have spent year in and year out. They know how each of those, different sections of the budget have performed. And it takes a lot of risk for someone to say, you know what, let's take 10 million of that and invest it in podcasting, because they might not see the return from what they had done in the past. And so it really is very risky for them. And that, coupled with the fact that the buying process and the targeting processes are different than digital, it makes it that much more difficult. Now, I do feel like every year we get closer and closer and closer. We get more opportunities. We're having more and more conversations with massive agencies that are really, interested in dipping their toe in the water. But it still is something new and something that feels unproven. And because we don't have data point for data point of what they are used to seeing, it feels like a risk. And I think that it's also one of the thoughts I had recently is that audio isn't, even though it's new and it's unproven, it's not super sexy, right?
That's
It's
the problem.
I mean, audio has been around forever. It's been around for hundreds of years. And so when you're a new marketer and you're like, hey, I've got this great new idea. How about we do audio? It's not
Right.
oh, wow, this is the cool new social platform. Let's have a presence there. It's just not that new and exciting. And so I think that really makes people kind of second guess it. And then when they don't feel like there are as many of these kind of fail safe tools, I mean, even just down to most marketing that is done is split tested like crazy, right? So it's like, I'm going to run an ad today that has these points, and tomorrow I'm going to run a different one, and I'm going to compare and contrast those. I'm going to see what worked here and there. Executing that in audio is really cumbersome.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's just different enough that it's difficult for marketers to take the leap. So that's my assessment.
My assessment's been that the ones that are controlling the contracts are 23, 26, 27 years old usually. At least that was my experience.
Yeah, no, I think you're right.
And then they have to stay safe. They have to meet performance, because if they don't, they get fired. If they
get fired. Yeah, their job's literally on the line.
Right. And if they do good, they move up. My hope was that enough of them had moved up that now we're 13, 14, 15, 17 years later. That person now is he or she is in their 50s and we did podcasting before, let's go, and but I think they're in the same bracket. They have to stay safe, and I think it's time. Looking ahead, what do you think is going to shape the next wave of podcast advertising?
So we already talked about programmatic, but I definitely think that programmatic is going to be playing a big role in it. I think that getting to a place where we have more centralized ad buying that is taking place from a programmatic method will really allow for greater infusion of those dollars. The pixel tracking technology is continuing, I would say, to be very valuable and improve. Looking at the results of campaigns, I think, has been really valuable. And then, my hope is that as we're looking at podcasters, that we do look at them as content creators. And, I know we've been talking a lot about the, positives and negatives of video, but at the end of the day, you are a content creator. And if you are thinking about creating a podcast, you should also be thinking about doing a newsletter. And you should have at least one social platform where you have a presence.
Right.
And, you should think about your strategy beyond podcasting. And my hope is that we can continue to refine our content creators as influencers, and that there will be a bigger value placed on host read ads because, hey, yeah, maybe I can go buy this programmatically for $5 or $6, but I could buy this for $20 or $30 in a host read, and I know I'm going to get a much better performance out of that than out of programmatic. And so I believe that as we can better define our content creators as influencers, that there is a lot of power in that for the industry.
I'm going to talk to you about two more things. Consumer behavior continue to change. We've got lots of options. We got TikTok,
Sure.
well, maybe for a little while longer. We got TikTok, Instagram, we got YouTube Shorts, YouTube, Facebook, whatever, Reels. We got all these things. Has shifting listener, and I say listener, because this is what we are. We're largely an audio medium, even though the narrative says podcasting is everything now. But has listener patterns influence ad rates, campaign performance? Is that stayed pretty steady?
I would say that that has stayed pretty steady. I think that there is kind of the expectation that listenership is just going to continue to grow. But I wouldn't say that the advertising industry is like, oh my goodness, look at this huge increase in listenership. Let's go ahead and spend there. I think that there's just the expectation that it's going to continue to grow.
That's good. You also do the podcast broker. Tell me about the podcast broker.
Yeah, so I started the podcast broker about 2 years ago now, and I created the company to help facilitate the buying and selling of whole podcasts. So through True Native Media, through the representation process, I would have podcasters who would come to me and say, you know what, I think I'm done podcasting. I think I'm just going to shutter this show. And I would be like, oh my gosh, your show is one of the biggest shows in your genre. You can't just stop doing it. This is an asset. You should sell it. And at the time, there was really not a vehicle to help sell entire podcasts. Like, yes, of course, really large networks like Gimlet and Wondery. Yeah, there's going to be big people who want to, other big companies that want to come in and buy that. But the everyday average podcaster, I think there's going to be a life cycle. And I have found that it seems like it's at about that 9 to 10 year mark where most podcasters are like, I think I'm kind of done. And right now we're facilitating a buy, for instance, with a show that is really strong in their particular genre. I've got another podcaster who's just getting started. They're just having a hard time finding traction. And so they're going to be purchasing this show. They're going to be stepping in as the new host. And so suddenly now they get that 10 years worth of growth that's going to happen really quickly for them, right? Because there's already an established audience. And so it's been really a terrific company. And it's something that I think most people don't think about. Most people don't say like, oh, I should sell my podcast. But many, many people sell YouTube channels. Many people, of course, sell websites. And there really is an opportunity to grow a podcast and make it a real asset. And then not only benefit from that asset through all those different ways we talked about through monetization, but when you do find yourself at a place that you'd like to step away from the show, actually selling it.
Do you guys help that transition? Because there's risk there when you change host. So is there a big strategy, or do you have a basic strategy package? Okay, so you're stepping into the shoes of a giant potentially. How does that often shape up? I'm sure there's going to be some audience loss no matter what, and there could be audience gain too. So it can go both ways, I would think.
Yeah, so that isn't necessarily a service that we offer, although that's not a bad recommendation. So we have seen two different types of transactions. So we've seen the transaction where it's like, I'm done hosting the show. I don't want to be here anymore. Here's the show. I'm out. Right. I always recommend that you do some transition episodes together, right? The audience needs to hear the two of you together, needs to hear the story. And also, it's going to be pretty hard for me to sell like the Heather Osgood show without Heather Osgood, right? So like, I don't think Conan O'Brien is going to be selling his show anytime soon. So you have to think about the genre of your show. But the other thing that I'm seeing happen a lot too, which I think is important to consider, is that I'm finding that networks are interested in acquiring shows. So the network wants to own the IP. The podcast host is fine hosting the show. They just don't want to do all the other things that come along with it, right? So imagine if somebody said, hey, Todd, all you have to do is once a week sit down and have an hour-long conversation with a guest. We'll do everything else for you. And oh, by the way, we'll pay you $2,000 or $3,000 a month to do it. A lot of hosts are open to that,
of course.
Now, of course, they don't own the IP anymore, but they also don't have all of the headache that comes along with it. So we've seen both of those happen fairly frequently, and obviously they're going to be different, but there really is a lot of opportunity out there for this. So I'm excited to grow it.
Well, I know one thing. I try to sell at least one domain a year just to pay for my domain renewals because I think I'm up to about 400 domains. So if anybody's looking for a domain, I might have one. Personal, nothing that Blueberry owns because we,
Yeah,
we,
yeah.
we hold ours close. So did I miss anything today on the advertising side? Is there something that I missed? Do you think we've kind of covered where the space is as you see it right now?
Yeah. I really believe that we have. One thing to consider is that, well, number one, True Native Media is having a banner year this year. I
Awesome.
think the economy is doing well, which has helped us. Advertisers are still very interested in partnering with podcasters, and if you are interested in doing good ad reads and cultivating that audience so that advertisers can reach who they're trying to reach, there's a lot of opportunity.
We were watching business wise June, July, August, September, and I was a little bit, a little bit worried. And then it was I don't know what you saw on your side, but as soon as the election was over, it's like the floodgates opened up and all the money came
Yep.
back.
Yep.
And so it was just, I mean, almost instantaneous. Like people had been sitting on cash for a quarter at least, and I thought, whew, okay, let's go. We can rock and roll again here. But yeah, it was. I think yeah, that's good. It's good to hear your numbers are up and people are interested. So for sure, if you've sat through this, and we should have said it again earlier, TrueNativeMedia.com. And they've got a contact link on the website. I'm about 90% sure. And
Yep, we do.
yeah, and reach out to Heather and her team. It's not just Heather; she has a team over there, and they can help you if you're ready to make that jump for representation. But the only advice I'll give to you that are talking about contacting Heather is better answer your email. Because podcasters notoriously do not answer their email.
It is true. That is true. I do not know why that is the case. Please have an email, answer your email. It really helps.
Yeah, have one at least you look at every 24 hours.
Yep. Yep.
Don't have her have to chase you down because you might lose the deal. Because what'll happen is she'll get a call on Friday, and a media buyer will say, "We've got an extra 100,000 or 20 or 10 or $15,000 to spend, but I need to move that by Monday." And if you don't pay
Yep.
attention to your email, you'll miss it. So
Yep. It's true. It happens frequently, to be honest.
so is it Heather at TrueNativeMedia.com? What's the email address?
Yep, that's it. Heather at TrueNativeMedia.com. Or I'm really active on LinkedIn, so please connect with me over there. And I have my own podcast called the Podcast Advertising Playbook. So if you want to have lots of advertising information thrown at you, you can look that up as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for being on Podcast Insider Special Edition, and much success continued for True Native Media. Thank you.
Thank you.